Hi, my name is Hannah.
Hi, my name is Mani.
Hi, my name is Andy.
Hi, my name is Eda Erdalmış.
And we are Colony 9 Blue Seagulls.
Our topic is, what is a neural network and how has biology helped construct them? To start off, what is a neural network? A neural network is a layer of numerous perceptrons, meaning they process an input and an output that are all supposed to work together in order to make sense of some information given and produce a sensible output. This is very similar to functions that we learn about in math, and in this case, we can think of the function as a linear one. An important thing to note is that each time the neural network produces an output which doesn't make sense or is wrong, the neural network's neurons changes how it processes the information. For example, let's use Sammy. Sammy is getting ready to eat a meal and has peppers and other spicy stuff next to him. This is similar to the inputs given in the neural network. He decides to try his meal with the peppers, but unknowingly he adds too much. And as Sammy tries the meal, he instantly regrets it and promises himself to never do that again. In a system, this would be like processing the inputs in a way which creates a bad output. So the next time he sits down to eat, Sammy doesn't make the same mistake of adding too much spice to his meal. Likewise, in a system, the neural network is highly unlikely to make the same mistake again. Neural networks will soon prove to be crucial in the future. Currently, neural networks are proving to be extremely useful in identification of both diseases and biomarkers. One example is convolutional neural networks, a specific type of neural network designed to take an image input. These are being utilized to analyze MRI images to predict Alzheimer's, and this fits nicely into computational biology because a computational tool, CNNs, are being used to solve a biological problems, which is detecting Alzheimer's. But back to the main topic. How does our biological understanding of the human brain help construct these advanced neural networks? We decided that in order to get more specific with the biological references in neural networks, we would choose a reference, the convolutional neural network. However, the CNN didn't just magically appear on a mathematician's sheet one day in the 1980s. It found its origins in something very familiar to many households in the world, the cat.
The fundamental concepts for the convolutional neural network roots from Dr. David Hubel and Dr. Torsten Wiesel's research on the brain sensor processing starting in the late 1950s.
To do this, they inserted a microelectrode, which is an instrument used to record neural signals into the primary visual cortex of a partially anthonized cat. The primary visual cortex is the first site that receives signals from the retina in the brain. In the experiment, the two researchers projected a light bar stimulus in front of the cat. The fundamental aspect the two researchers noticed was that depending on the orientation of the light bar stimulus, the activated neurons that fired varied. Neurons are nerve cells in your brain that receive and transmit signals. The dendrites of a neuron receive the neurotransmitters through the synapse from the end of the presynaptic neuron's axonal terminal. Now you may be wondering what exactly does all this have to do with the convolutional neural network, or neural networks in general? Well, right here is a very simple diagram of a neural network, and each of these nodes are actually artificial neurons called perceptrons. Perceptrons follow a similar model to actual neurons, and you can think of them as really functions. The cell body receives weighted inputs and calculates the weighted sum and adds the sum to a bias. The bias and weights are learnable parameters. Manik will elaborate on the concept of learning later in this video, but for now just remember that they are adjustable values that help our neural network give the desired output. Something important to notice here is that the weighted sum plus bias is really the same as the linear function mx plus b that returns a y value or output. But just like how different neurons that fire depending on the orientation in Hubel and Wiesel's experiment, depending on the input, we want to put more emphasis on certain outputs of perceptrons than others. Because of this, we have something called the activation function. There are many different types of activation functions, and the middle hidden layers and the final hidden layers will generally have different activation functions. For the middle layer, a very commonly used one is called the ReLU function, which essentially computationally inactivates certain perceptrons and therefore puts emphasis on the ones that carry more important information. When we reach the final hidden layer, the activation function used will depend on the application of the neural network. For applications where probabilistic outcomes are desired, such as image classification, the sigmoid function which assigns our outputs into probabilistic values between 0 to 1 is popularly used. Later in this video, Eda will go more in depth on the mathematics behind the ReLU and sigmoid function. At the moment, I would like to point out something very important when you look at this neural network.
The diagram I had shown on the whiteboard was an example of a shallow neural network with only 3 hidden layers. Modern neural networks require deep learning with many more hidden layers. The idea of deep learning is essential to neural networks in that because it is a better reflection of the biological complexity of interactions between neurons and the human brain, it is this deepness that allows it to be applied to more modern complex applications.
As Hannah described earlier, the first sophisticated neural networks were based off of animal neurons. But what is the math behind it? To put it shortly, neural networks are a series of matrix vector multiplications over and over again. There are many convoluted mathematical theories proving how this works, but for the sake of time, we'll move on. Imagine we have a set of data we want to have our algorithm interpret. In this case, it can be these circles of varying sizes. Our algorithm will be, in time, made up of dozens of layers and units, or perceptrons as they used to be called, consisting of both a linear and a nonlinear function. For now, we'll just imagine we have a one-layer system. Our linear part will consist of several linear functions, which will take the data from its raw form and through one round of processing. After this, the data will go for a nonlinear activation function, which originally was a sigmoid function. Keep in mind this will only be the second to last function if we have more than one layer. The sigmoid function was chosen for its non-integer values between 0 and 1, demonstrating the two weighted paths the processed data could take, two different options with two different meanings. Nowadays, scientists prefer to use other nonlinear functions, such as the ReLU function, which resembles a ramp. ReLU is generally used for the middle layer of the neural network diagram. Essentially, it rectifies a linear function, meaning if the output is negative, the function will return a 0. If the output is positive, no change will be made. ReLU looks something like this. This will allow the creation of a threshold at different points, allowing for more sophisticated pathways. A neural network is simply this process of linear to nonlinear interpretation, being repeated over and over again, as many times as the designer wants, until the information is processed in a relevant manner. In this case, triangle. It can be whatever you want. This could be a regression graph, it could be an identifying commonalities between images. As long as the designers have a solid grasp on their algorithm, the magic of AI quickly boils down to repeated composite functions.
Learning for a neural network is altering how the neuron processes given information. A neuron has two attributes, a weight and a bias. Remember how we said the neuron is basically a function, in this case linear? If we use y equals mx plus b, then the input is x, the weight is m, the bias is b, and the output is y. So in order to change the y value without changing the input, we would have to adjust the slope, which is the weight, and the intercept, which is the bias. And one way of thinking about neural networks is a web of numerous functions with several coefficients and constants. There's one web of function that exists with the right coefficient and constant values, and when a neural network learns, it attempts to increase or decrease those values to make a better prediction next time. In our case, we can think of this as a function approaching values which allows it to make a better prediction with the data, therefore slowly becoming the optimal function. But this may leave some wondering, how does a neural network even know to increase or decrease, let alone by how much? This is where the topic of gradient descent comes into play. For this explanation, we will be talking about gradient descent for a very simple neural network, the perceptron. A loss function is involved to figure out how far away the prediction was from its actual value. This function is modeled through cost equals p minus t squared, where p represents the prediction and t is a target. Notice that when the prediction is equal to the target, the cost is 0, and if you graph this, you would get a parabola, and when the prediction is equal to the target, you get the vertex. The derivative of where x equals p on the function of c is used to change the value. You take that derivative value, take around 1/10 of it, and add it to the current weights and biases. Keep iterating over this process thousands of times, and you will get to a point where the cost is so low that the derivative will also be pretty low. This means barely anything will be added to the weights and biases, indicating you virtually approach the optimal values for the web of functions.
As Monica alluded to earlier, neural networks, especially convolutional neural networks, have become increasingly widespread with different applications in the world. Aside from its use for image analysis to identify diseases, convolutional neural networks have been used in tandem with other technology for a variety of different purposes. One such example is minimizing unsafe behavior in self-driving cars. A convolutional neural network can be trained to map pixels from a camera directly to the steering commands, allowing autonomous vehicles to make better decisions. Another example of the versatility of convolutional neural networks is the utilization of a convolutional neural network to make better decisions about stock trading. By training the convolutional neural network with data and images, the neural network is able to identify whether to buy, sell, or hold a stock. An application of convolutional neural networks in the field of biology can be seen in the research into the function of non-coding DNA sequences, also known as junk DNA. Comprising of over 98% of the entire human genome, junk DNA contains many disease-associated variants. By training a convolutional neural network with samples of DNA, researchers have found that convolutional neural networks are more effective than traditional methods of identifying transcription factor binding sites, which is critical to determining whether a variant can be associated with a disease. It should be evident that neural networks, including convolutional neural networks, are not only influential in developing what we already have, but also the technology and research of the future. So, when AIs inevitably take over the world, we can thank the cat brain for starting it all.